And please go back to the SDGs. Remember that these should always be our anchor when we think of possible research problems to do. And we need to ask ourselves, what can we do that could possibly contribute to the attainment of one of these goals? Even when you are still students, I hope you have that kind of mindset. So if we go back to that very simple question, what is your crop of interest? Remember that in your first two LLAs, there had been a lot of questions given to you there. And so far, especially in the first LLA, you had satisfactorily answered many of those questions. But perhaps you could actually extend the question, what crop species you either know or know very little that you are interested to further investigate. That alone should provide you a rich minefield of possible research questions to pursue. And for your second LLA, you could ask the question again, what were the concerns of the farmers you interviewed that struck you the most? If you would go through the answers of the farmer, perhaps there are a lot of possibilities, especially possible solutions that you could think of and you could pursue as a thesis study. So I have reminded you at the start of this course that one of the requirements would be a record book. And why is that? It's because you could use it to really record all your thoughts and especially possible questions that you would like to raise. Okay? So, you are really encouraged to start listing down your questions. You could start with very simple questions. What are the things that you are still interested to pursue? What are the things that you still don't know, especially about crops, about plants? And perhaps one of those questions could be a very good thesis problem. Okay? Now, if we have some examples, I could give you this. I was very interested about blue ternate years ago, and actually I had a student who I wanted to work with in terms of blue ternate, but perhaps he was not ready to do it. But this was the question that I sort of asked. Would blue ternate be a good intercrop for maize? We know that maize would always intercrop well with a legume, and there is a new leguminous species of interest to the community, and that is the blue ternate, except that it is not utilized as a usual legume. It is highly valued for its flowers, but actually the young pods are also usable as vegetables, and even the seeds afterwards when the pods get to mature. So that is always a question that I have raised. Would blue ternate be a good intercrop for maize? And that could be something very interesting. Another question is, now which type of maize? Because there are several types of maize. You could think of hybrid maize, OPV maize, based on, the varietal characteristics. Or you could have sweet corn or popcorn or other types of maize. And that is, I think, a valid question to raise. And then you could also ask this question. Which type of trellis be most effective for blue ternate when intercropped with either hybrid or OPV maize? Because it is a viney, it is a legume, it is a viney legume. So these are examples of questions which I think still don't have very solid answers and therefore still very researchable. So if you think about it, many simple questions actually are research problems that are just stated in interrogative form. And that is why you are highly encouraged to be really curious, to cultivate your curiosity, to not be afraid of asking questions. And if you think about indoor farming, in most developed countries in the world, with the changing climate, they have explored the possibility of indoor farming to eliminate a lot of the challenges like biotic and abiotic stresses, because indoors they can really control conditions. And so far, indoor farming had been proven effective for many horticultural species, like vegetable species and ornamentals. But us coming from the agronomic point of view, remember that we value rice and a lot of other staples. So I think it's a very valid question to ask, would indoor farming be also suitable for rice? Would it also work for rice? Just think about it. And if we just convert the question into a simple statement form, then perhaps we could say assessment, although I am not really in favor of any research problem that starts with assessment, because every research is an assessment, right? You don't have to write that word. But, well, just a working title, then you can say the assessment of the suitability of indoor farming for rice growth and productivity. That could be a working title, because I think there is still no very solid answer to the question raised. But you could finalize that question if you would also review the literature, and that will be another topic for discussion in this class. And indeed, some people had raised the question. And so you can see from the pictures here that there is a form of indoor paddy in this building with LED lights, a source of light for photosynthesis. And the rice paddy is even boxed properly with some weeds along the boxed buns, if you can call it, the pilapil. And there's even adequate amount of water in the paddy. And this is actually in response to that particular question which was raised, several years ago. These are additional pictures and would show us that the rice had been harvested. Okay? Now, this was actually the work of Pasono Group Incorporated in Tokyo, Japan. Now, mind you, Pasono Group Incorporated is not an agricultural company. It is a human resources company, which is a leader in Japanese employment and staffing solutions. In Japan, they understand that many young people have left the provinces and have come to the cities. And so, who are left behind? The old people who are left to tend the farms. And even if the Japanese people would be one of the healthiest people on earth, still it is unthinkable to leave all the hard work to the elderlies. So I think the Pasono Group of companies asked the question, can rice be also grown in the urban areas, in the cities? And is it possible to be grown indoors? And apparently they have proven that yes, it can be grown indoors. And that alone is something magical for me. Magical that is not doable, or that's not impossible, but it is highly possible. What am I talking about? It is highly doable. Okay? So if we talk about the research problem, okay, what should be its simple characteristics? So let's talk about the 5 factors to consider if we decide if a problem is researchable or not. Okay? Or this is like a criteria or a checklist to determine whether an idea we have in mind is still researchable or not. First, that problem exists in the company or in the country in general, and there are still no known solutions. Or perhaps there are some initial solutions, but still not the most viable solution, and that's why it still has to be pursued. Second, there are possible solutions, but they remain untested, and therefore, yes, those possible solutions are actually hypotheses that need to be proven true or not. Number 3, the possible solutions can be verified using statistical methods and techniques. If you remember something in the SLK number 2, there was a listing of what should be the characteristics of a good research. And one of those is that it should be analytical. And it becomes analytical if there are useful methods and techniques that would make us truly evaluate the data on a very sound statistics so that we can come up with valid conclusions. Number 4, the phenomenon of interest requires a scientific investigation to arrive at precise solutions. Okay, there is that magic phrase. Why am I using the word magic? But there is the phrase scientific investigation. Perhaps in the past, several people have pursued it, but not on the most logical, systematic process. And that is why possible solutions proposed were not very solid at all, were not the most viable. And so, yeah, it has to be reinvestigated perhaps, following a better procedure. Number 5, again, we know that if there are serious problems and concerns in the community, then they still demand to be addressed through good, solid research. Anything else? Well, even possible solutions may still need some basic questions to be answered. So, for example, going back, remember that the original question I raised was that, would blue ternate be a good intercrop with maize? But in order for the two to really pair off properly, then perhaps we need to also consider a very basic question: which trellis system would also be good for blue ternate, would be the most suitable for blue ternate if it is intercropped with maize? Remember that there are many different types of the trellis systems. Which one could work best? Because if we do intercropping, we need both crops to be very productive. Okay, I hope you remember your basic crop sci. So if we go back to the Pasona indoor rice production, there are still actually a lot of questions that can be asked. And these are, again, possible research problems. So this one, which varieties are most suitable for indoor farming? Inbreds, hybrids, traditional, modern, climate-proof, climate-smart varieties? Well, we don't know. We don't have the answer, or I haven't read up yet to find out, to get these answers. Another question is that what are the best yields and ROI if ever we try to use different varieties of rice? Which would give us the best yields and which would give us the best ROI? Remember that if we do indoor farming, although there would be less to non-biotic and abiotic stresses because conditions can be controlled, but perhaps the maintenance, electricity, power, etc. could still be expensive, because remember that sunlight was substituted with LED lights. So I think those questions still need to be answered. How about grain composition and eating quality? Would it be affected? Would these two traits be affected if rice is grown indoors? Asians are very particular about the eating quality of their rice, and that is why at the International Research Institute and at the Philippine Rice Research Institute, or PhilRice, there would always be a separate assessment just for the quality of the rice grains. That's how important it is for Asians. Another question is, can rice production indoors be shortened in duration without adverse effects on yield, quantity, and quality? For example, for traditional rices, many of them are aromatic and really very good tasting, but they are actually also very late maturing, 5 to 6 months even, maybe even more than 6 months. So if ever we would be interested to try growing traditional rices indoors, is there a way to shorten their duration without affecting their aromatic traits and other special traits? And I think there are still questions that can be raised. And again, questions like this are possible problems that are just stated in the question form. Okay? So let's be reminded of what are the characteristics of a research problem. Why do I say let's be reminded? Because I think we have learned this way back in high school. And I think these were emphasized in your senior high. Most of you have participated, I think, in scientific investigations. And I remember one of the senior high school teachers in Valencia City inviting me to speak or share about research to his class. So I believe that you have been taught about this one, and well, that's why I said it's just a reminder. So the characteristics of a research problem is just SMART. And I think you know this. S for specific, M for measurable, A for achievable or attainable, R for realistic or result-oriented, and T for time-bound. So these are very simple to remember and therefore very easy to check if we have satisfied these 5 characteristics of a good research problem when we think of one. So let's give some examples. Well, the same. I go back to blue ternate. Will blue ternate be a good intercrop for maize? And yeah, it seems very specific, and we can answer that by measuring some data, especially yield, to prove that it is either a good intercrop or not. I think it's very achievable and attainable. We can grow them in the field, or we can grow them in a small space in your home garden or in your front yard or backyard. I think there are a lot of parameters that are doable to measure or to determine or assess. That's why it's realistic and it's time-bound. We know the duration of the growth of maize, and although blue ternate is a perennial legume, but we can sort of stop the data collection when maize would also be harvested. So yeah, we can set up, and I think everything would be SMART. How about this question? What is the best trellis system for blue ternate when intercrop with maize? I think it is also smart. Will this intercropping combination be profitable? Well, it could be built in. This question can be a built-in question to the first two, because when we talk about crop production research, then we always try to measure or assess the profitability of what we are trying to introduce as a new approach or a new technology or a new possible combination. In this case, a possible new combination of intercropping. So what could be sources of research problems? Well, so many. First one is that your own interests, your own questions, and these could come from your own observations, and if you're aware of what is really happening in your own community. And that is why in your LLA number 2, you were encouraged and pushed a little bit to really get out of your comfort zones and to start that sense of becoming more aware of your own community. And you were encouraged to really talk to the people whom we really are targeting to serve when you get your degrees. And I think even before you graduate, you can already start helping your community, especially the farming community. Second is from current and past researches. These researchers would always establish the scopes and limitations of their research, and therefore one big area for possible studies would be those that were not covered in those researches. And most often these researchers would actually point out what are still the gaps in the research, and the gaps are the researchable areas most often. Another is from the recommendations from completed studies. If you read the recommendation part, many authors or researchers would actually tell you this should be done in the future to further validate their findings, or perhaps this particular research should be tweaked in this way so that what they were not able to cover in their previous studies can be verified by interested researchers. So a lot of possible research problems could be gleaned or harvested, in air quotes, from the recommendations from completed studies. Number 4, your original and creative ideas based on problems in your communities and localities. I think we could tie that up with number 1. Okay? And that is exactly, number 4 is exactly one of the rationale why I wanted you to do your LLA 1 and your LLA number 2. And I put some asterisks on number 2 and number 3 just to remind us that research is cyclical. A good research is actually cyclical. We start with a question, a research question, and we go through the process of trying to prove or disprove that question. And once we provide the answer to that original question, it opens up another window of a set of different questions which could be researchable. Okay? And let's go to the criteria of a good research problem. So we'll talk about the characteristics, the sources, and now we need to always assess, is our research problem good? Okay? So what's the criteria? I think there are 6. First, it should be interesting. Exactly. If you're not interested, then what is the use of pursuing it? Because if you're not interested, you would not fully be committed to go through that research journey. Okay? You will not be able to put all your best effort if you're not even interested in the topic, in the problem that you are going to pursue. The second is that it should be innovative. Although we say that you could go and look into past researches and recommendations from completed researches for possible problems, I hope we should not just be repetitive. Okay? We need to innovate, to tweak it a little bit. If we need to look at the problem from a different angle, or look from using a fresh pair of eyes, not literally, but it should be innovative. If you remember the picture in the first part of this lecture of that person who put up a shading system for his motorcycle to solve the problem of intense heat and to devise a way of, packing his stuff so that even if he was just using a motorcycle, he could actually carry so much of what he would be buying. Okay? How he would tie it up to the side of his motorcycle, whole sack of maybe rice, or I don't know, and all the other stuff that he buys. So innovation, thinking of what can be done to make it better. Okay? And definitely it should be cost effective, especially for students like you. And you know that budget limitations these days, finances is really a struggle. And so cost effectiveness of a research problem should always be considered. And this would be the last set. Again, to remind us that if we propose a research problem, then it is relevant to the needs and problems of people. And it should be relevant to the thrust of the government. And in this case, the SDGs would be a very good anchor to go to, because anything related to attaining the SDG is indeed relevant. Again, it should be measurable. There should be data that can be collected, solid, valid data that can be collected, and it should be time-bound. There should be a limitation. So for all of you who would like to graduate on time, make sure that you put that extreme consideration in mind, okay, that you should be time-bound. I don't encourage you to extend. I am encouraging you to graduate on time, because it is very doable to do a good research even for a short period of time. As long as you thought of a very good research question, you check of its criteria, you look at its solidity or validity, and of course to consider the advices of your mentors, okay? Thesis mentors. Now, having talked about the possible research topic or problem, we now go to the objectives. How about the research objectives? Well, the research objective should still be SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented, or realistic and time-bound. And you will have several exercises in the laboratory to really practice a lot about writing SMART objectives. And how about you as the researcher? Well, this was already discussed way back in lecture 2 as presented in the SLK. So aside from those things, well, this is what I gave you when we started this class. As a researcher, I encourage you to remember your click acrostic. As a researcher, curiosity is really important. Please be curious. Please develop your logic. Please develop your imagination, or use your imagination. And C, the other C, please capitalize on your creativity. And K, when you have enough knowledge and understanding about your field, that's why you have several basic courses in crop sci before you are asked to get these methods of research in your third year, then you have adequate really connect the dots and think of the supporting ideas to your proposed research problem. Sorry about that. Oops, I hit the wrong button. We are now down to the last 2 slides of this lecture, and you are still reminded to be curious. Develop the habit of thinking and asking questions. And let me share with you the story of Dr. Ambeth Ocampo. He is a former monk at the Monastery of Transfiguration in San Jose, Malaybalay City, and currently he is a professor of history at the Ateneo de Manila University. And of course, as a historian, he is naturally curious. And one of the questions that he had asked before was that why the statues of Rizal are always wearing a trench coat or an overcoat, or if not, having a trench coat over an arm. And he dedicated some good years of research for that question alone. And as an output of that research, out of that simple question and curiosity, he was able to publish a book entitled Rizal Without the Overcoat, which was a winner of the National Book Award. So, see, out of one simple question, and you go through dedicated, committed, good research, then you get to publish something like this. I have a copy of this book, and if you're interested, when I see you next semester in campus, if you would like to borrow this book, then I could actually lend it to you. All right? Finally, let me end the lecture with some of the inspiring words from Albert Einstein, although the mere mention of the name Albert Einstein should be inspiring already. But he had left us with so many wonderful words, and I think these ones are very appropriate for this lecture. The true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. Let me repeat that. The true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. Because every one of us has knowledge, but we are challenged to do something of what we know. What can we imagine? What can we do out of what we know? And In agriculture, in crop science, in agronomy, or plant breeding, or horticulture, these are all applied sciences, and therefore these would be good reminder for us to challenge ourselves. What should we do with what we know? And because as agriculturists, we are supposed to utilize our knowledge to create something, to do something to serve our target community, and that would be the farming community and people in general. Okay, so for questions or clarification, let me know through our GC or when we do our Google Meet next week. And with that, bye and have a wonderful day.